don't know about you, but I've been that worthless guy more than once in my life, botching things, but we'll get into that in a minute. So the title of today's sermon is The Pathway, and Jesus is showing us how to be on the pathway. At St. John, we talk a lot about pathway. It's a reference point for us, our pathways and compassion, visitation ministry. This past week, we talked about the moving mission forward, pathways to moving mission forward. And so it's a term that we do use a lot. And for us, the pathway is a pathway of faith that follows in the footsteps of Jesus. Jesus teaches us the way of peace. And so we're invited to stay on that pathway no matter where or what we do, to be aware of the pathway, to be aware of the peace, and to recognize it is there that we're invited to move in our life and to share God's love and to receive God's love. We walk on that pathway knowing that Jesus is with us. We recognize that Jesus is with us here today in this sanctuary as we worship God and reflect on our faith and be prepared to take that faith out. And Jesus calls us all the time out of this space and to meet him out into the world, because Jesus is engaged in all kinds of things, and there's opportunities for us to connect in a variety of ways. Well, anyway, the disciples who walked with Jesus were concerned about this notion of the second coming. What is this second coming? When will it take place? And they were concerned about this. And Jesus said, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't. And of course, this message that we read today, written by Matthew, was initially heard about 50, 60 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. People are still waiting for this second coming, and the answer remains, I don't know. I really don't know when this will happen. In today's lesson, Jesus wants us to watch and to wait and to respond by living the life of peace. Now, the question we might still ask is, how long, O God, before you come and serve us and save us? And I tell you the truth, each one of you are the answer to that question, how long, for someone who is suffering and hurting. God's love coming through you to the person in need is an answer to the question, how long? Now, Jesus tells a story about three servants who are invited to wait, but also to work for the master to return. The master leaves. And he gives each servant, according to his ability, a sum of money that they are to use, that they are entrusted with, that they are to grow. And a talent, by the way, a talent is equal to 20 years of salary for one person. So it's a lot of money. And he expects these servants who have been trained, and he understands their abilities, their capabilities, their weaknesses. He gives them the right amount. He recognizes what they can do. Remember, when Jesus is teaching, he always will say, too, my yoke is easy. Put it on. Walk with me. We're not going to go too fast. We're not going to go too slow. We're going to do the things that we can uniquely do together. That's what's going to happen. Well, two of them do very well. But one drifts away, drifts from his mission out of fear. And as he drifts away out of fear, This is recognized by the master, but the other thing is the guy is consumed with a certain amount of fear, a certain amount of guilt. He doesn't see the owner in a good light. He's in a bad space. There's an empty feeling that is real. He recognizes that he did squander an opportunity. No matter what he said, it was the fear that kept him from moving forward. The master knew he could do it, but he chose not to out of fear. Now, if we're honest with ourselves, we have each played maybe all three of these roles more than once in our lives. We might know what it's like to squander an opportunity, and it does not feel good. I know that for me, many years ago, I squandered a great deal because of my alcoholism. I squandered so many opportunities in my life because of the addiction. And in truth, I was so afraid. I was racked with fear that I didn't know how to live without it, but I was also racked with fear of the natural consequences of living the way I was living. And it was very, very hard. And I don't know if I ever said, God, how long? But what I do know is one of God's missionaries came to me one day with hope and a plan. And I listened. And the fear that I had evaporated. And I started a fresh new life in the kingdom back in 1987, Christmas Eve. It happened. One of God's chosen came to me and rescued me. And I was, by the way, during those years, I was still paid to think theologically. So I wasn't totally, but I was a mess. You know, thinking about this idea of fear and mission and possibly drifting or fulfilling mission, and what Jesus was commissioning people to do, it would seem that the larger church, the big church, we're part of it, but the big church has been racked with fear or going beyond the boundaries of the sanctuary for a long, long time. And that's not to say the church hasn't been out there doing great things, because there's a lot of great things that have happened in this world as a result of the people of faith. However, when we look at the magnitude of the church and the performance of it out into the world, and we were an investor, maybe we don't do enough. We inherited that. Our parents inherited it. Their parents inherited it. I mean, this has been a thing for a long, long time. And what we find, I guess if we think about it sociologically maybe, that the peace that we understand, that we confess in the sanctuary, has been replaced in the world by the all too cruel competition for the dollar outside of the church walls. Outside of the church walls. The world, as Jesus would call it, not to be confused with the kingdom, they're two different worlds, okay? The world, as Jesus would define it, has been defined and was defined by power and wealth rather than peace. And therefore, the church that we have inherited and learned from has and had drifted from mission. And that's not to say good things didn't happen. But think about this, friends. If the principles of peace, the great shalom, were fully operationalized in the government sector, in the business sector, in the service sector, throughout the world, would things be different? Can you imagine? You see, we've been left with the idea of freedom of religion, but also the separation of church and state. It's okay to worship as you wish. Here, a safe place. You can do that. The question becomes, is the world ready for what we learn here to be applied to every dimension of God's kingdom? God owns everything. That's the challenge. Now, Jesus' church, the Church of Jesus Christ, properly understood, should be the mobilization of God's love in the world. The kingdom is invited into the world. And why should that kingdom experience not be incorporated? Why should God's love not be fully incorporated in business and in government and in service? Why not? One of the problems we have today in trying to negotiate this issue of separation of church and state and all this other stuff is that the church has been seen as a single issue entity. There may be one or two issues that society is defining the church. It's not looking at the magnitude of shalom, but rather targeting a couple issues, and this is it. And everybody thinks, well, this is this or this is that, but it's the peace that far extends just a couple of issues. It goes way deeper than that. The rhetoric we should hear from anyone is the rhetoric of peace. How do we operationalize it to make the world a better place? How do we operationalize it to make our business a better place to work and our customers to be served that much better? How do we do that? We've been given the playbook. Remember, my friends, you are the church. You don't have to look any further than the mirror. Each one of us is empowered to take that love out, to stay on the pathway. There's no limit as to what you can do or what we can do. God is always preparing us for a great adventure. But we got to put the yoke on, and we have to stay on the path. And we have to see all people as sacred and walking on that pathway as well. We need to encourage others. We need to embody Jesus as best as we can with that yoke. We need to be able to think more, to discern what we hear and see in the world, which is not the peace. And do we consume what we hear and see if it is not relative to the shalom? The proper answer is no, we don't get rid of that. Push it away. Push it away. Don't buy a bad gospel. Don't buy into anything that does not resemble peace, because if we do, we are weakening our capability to walk on that pathway. It's up for each of us to understand that. Now, at St. John, there's evidence of substantial spiritual growth. Our footprint is expanding by the power of the Holy Spirit. You see and you saw what's going on with moving mission forward. This is a very active, vibrant, missional context that can only grow. And I know that you are prayerfully considering the substantial nature of this ministry. It's almost like planting a new ministry. We're building on heritage, but we're moving forward, recognizing that God is always creating. We don't have to be stuck. We can marvel at the adventure. We can begin to say, okay, where do we go from here? And we can now and invite others to this missional experience. Invite children, grandchildren, family, and friends. Invite neighbors. Talk about the opportunity that we have with the days we have left to make a difference in the world. Invite people in. And here's the thing, we recognize as we evolve here, God brings in new talents, new capabilities, new understandings that breathe fresh life into who and what we are. And each one of you has the opportunity to invite others into this space. And that's something that we can do. We're invited to trust God's hope and to follow the footsteps of Jesus, and to not give up and to not give in to any form of negativity about the good news, to keep moving forward, to trust, to recognize each one of us are children of light, to stay on the pathway and to always believe, celebrate, and know that he is risen. Amen.